Everybody, and welcome to SA Rugby Magazine. I am Kevin Ferguson, and I've got Gavin Rich with me. Rich Pickings. Gav, we were right about the URC. You were more right than me. What an end to the competition with the rugby championship. Um, I thought the score flattered Argentina in the second test, but all's good that ends well. I told people to take the Box at 4-1 to win the championship. We made 6 bets. I won 5 of those bets. So it's like, it was a successful tournament.
Yeah, well, it was a bit of a gimme, to be honest. I mean, when the Springboks went in, I never expected them to lose to Australia right in the beginning of the competition. I think when they lost that game, when they lost that game, everybody started to change their perspective, and that was a bit of a strange game, as we've said before. The Springboks overplayed. They got complacent quite quickly, and then they got beaten. And I think everybody read too much into that. Eden Park was always going to be a difficult one, and it was, and the Springboks lost. But I think in the end, I agree with you. I mean, 2 points that final game. It should have been. It should if the Springboks had kicked on when they should have. I think what they were about 17 points up, maybe more. If they'd kicked on then, I think they would have won by 30, and I think that's what we took. Wasn't it?
From my point of view, there was a couple things. One, it was that game, and that game got me a wallaby tattoo. So I wear it proudly or with shame. And the second was the game against the second game where South Africa barely beat them by 8 points. I think that's what got people thinking about, geez, where are we in the pecking order? Where are we in world rugby? It was a cause of concern. But like you say, in rugby, a week is a long time. We were 1-2. We came back and won the tournament. We were always a better team in that tournament. I'd never shied away from that, especially when you're messing around with that many players, having them in the team, starting them. I mean, look at the changes in the Springbok team over that 6-week period. So it was immense.
Well, you mentioned that second game. You mentioned that
Yeah.
second game. And to me, that was probably Rusty's weirdest selection of all the selections. When I arrived at Cape Town Stadium that day for the game, it was Kobus Visa who told me that Peter Steff. Well, who was it who pulled out? It was it Jasper Visa? The number 8 had pulled out. Oh, it was Jean-Luc Dupré that the number 8 who'd been selected for the game had been pulled out, and that they were playing Kwagga at number 8, and that they were going to play Andre Esterhuizen as the reserve loose forward. He was going to be almost the only backup. That gave me a fright. I remember thinking, because Peter Steff had already been left out of that game, and Peter Steff was very important, to me is one of the most important, most valuable Springbok players always. So he was out of that game, and then having lost the previous week, I think the Springboks might have started to doubt themselves, because they were very nervy in that game. I mean, it was a very nervous performance. Remember, it was Pollard was playing fly half. They relied on him to basically kick them to victory, and they relied on Australian mistakes in that game to win. So I agree that there was, after that game, I was also starting to think, well, where are the Boks going? And I was concerned about Rusty's selections. I mean, how he didn't, that was a game that cried out for Evan Roos to be present. I couldn't understand at that point why he was left out. I know Rusty gets upset when people question him about Evan Roos, but every time I see him play in the URC, he looks like an international player to me, and I just don't understand why he's not in the Boks squad. So,
Well, I would say on that, and that there's some personal issues with the two of them. There's nothing more than that. I can't it makes no sense, like you say, that he should be in there, but there's some personal issues. Sometimes people have personal issues, and it causes some interesting selections or non-selections.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've heard it was personal issues that go beyond Evan. It goes to somewhere else in the family. But listen, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. But what I do know is that when they went into that game with Kwagga, and I wasn't denigrating Kwagga. Some people came back and said, well, what's wrong with Kwagga? There's nothing wrong with Kwagga. It was the backup. It was what happened if Kwagga got injured that I was worried about. I'm sorry, I can't see Andre Esterhuizen, even though he's been pushed through. I can't see him suddenly slotting in at number 8. And he's not there was no sort of there was no genuine number 8 in the squad. And I mean, Rusty also used Kobus Visa, who's more of a lock or a blindside flank, as a number 8 in the season, and that also surprised me. So there were doubts you're right. I doubted it less after the Ellis Park game than I did after the Cape Town game. After the Ellis Park game, I thought, well, that's an aberration. I
Yeah,
thought the Springboks overplayed. They were out on their feet. I called it in the first. I was sitting next to my colleague in the press box, and I said this is when they were well up in the game, and I said they
yeah.
must be careful of running themselves out on their feet because I've seen that happen at Ellis Park before. It usually happens to New Zealand teams, not to South African teams, or to
Mm.
Australian teams and not to South African teams. But in this particular game, they were playing that game at 100 miles an hour. So I understood why they lost that game. But
Well,
after
hence
Cape Town,
hence the 37 unanswered points.
yeah, but
Yeah.
Rusty did sort of change tack a bit after that game. I mean, knowing Rusty, he probably always was going to, but no, not so much after that game, but after Eden Park. It was almost like after Eden Park, he made a decision to himself that I've got to start backing youngsters. I've got to start backing the exciting players, and that's when Sasha came in and played fly half, and I think he's played fly half ever since. Although Marnie did very well as his replacement during the game in Wellington.
Yeah.
He had Damien Willemse in that game in Wellington at number 12, which I thought was a brilliant selection. Now, I understand why why Willemse has now gone back to fullback because there was an injury. I believe Fussy was injured. I think Fussy when he's playing is the number one fullback, but he was injured, so Damien had to go. He was forced to send Damien back to fullback. And he also chose Caden Moody to come in and play a role at outside centre. People talk about Sasha being a special talent. There are a number of very special generational talents, as they'd call them, in that Springbok team, and
Mm.
and that was so exciting. And it was I think Rassie probably was waiting to find out, um, whether he could back those youngsters like he did, and he found out. He found out in Wellington, and now I think he's going to probably back those guys more and more. That doesn't mean that somebody like Jesse Creel isn't going to play again. He probably will, and it doesn't mean that Andre Pollard isn't going to play again. But I think we're going to see Rassie backing Sasha as the starting fly half more and more. And I think he's going to become the sort of established first choice number 10 with the other guys filling in when they need to.
Well, I agree with that. How many? We're going to get into this, but let's chat about the URC. The first four games are done and dusted. The Stormers look like world beaters.
Yeah.
Giving up an average of 5.67 points a game over four games. Top of the log with Munster. What's your thoughts on? I mean, we'll get into the Sharks later. What's your take on the Stormers? I mean, they've just smashed everybody before them.
Okay, well, my first take on the Stormers is, and
And
this is,
they were big underdogs in the first game against
yeah,
that Irish side, and I took them at 6-1. I took the Stormers at 6-1.
okay, good. Well, that was a good bet. I would have probably agreed with you then, just because the Leinster were very under strength. Look, we didn't know.
Mm.
The thing is, we've seen Leinster under strength before, but when Leinster come here under strength because they're missing Irish players, they might be missing 8 or 9 players or 10 players. But they had a sod of a lot of players in that British and Irish Lions squad. I think it was it 13 or 16. That's a lot of players to be missing. And so
Yes.
Leinster had the same problem as the Sharks have, in my opinion. We'll get into the Sharks later. But Leinster had the same problem this year. And fortunately for them, it only happens every 4 years. It's when there's a
Mm.
Lions series. But the Leinster had the problem that they didn't have a pre-season with their top players. And I think we saw them pay for that in this last game against Munster last weekend. Leinster suddenly, so normally they have got a good understrength team, but it's got a smattering of international players still in it. This team was a little bit weaker. The one that came to South Africa was a little bit weaker than the Leinster teams we're used to. So it was a good performance from the Stormers. It was an excellent performance, and I think we saw how good that Leinster team were the following week when they actually pushed the Bulls the whole way. I mean, they pushed the Bulls right to the end of that game at Loftus. So that was a very good. I would say that one of the things that there's two things that the Stormers have benefited from. One is that they have had a better draw than some of the other teams. I mean, apart from Leinster, the other games that they've played so far, I would have said you'd expect them to win. Ospreys at home, Zebra away, and even Scarlets away, because the Scarlets are having a nightmare
But,
season.
the Stormers don't travel well. They haven't
But
traveled well.
but those are two teams that they beat. Those are the two teams that
Yeah.
they have beaten overseas. They actually
Yeah.
won 26-5 against Zebra last year in Parma. So it's not the first time that they've blanked Zebra. it's just because the other thing that I think what the Stormers have is they've had very shrewd management. Um, John Dobson didn't let any of his players play in the Currie Cup. There was no crossover between Currie Cup and URC at all. Okay, I know that right at the end, Paul de Villiers came in towards the end of the Currie Cup season, and Yuri Matia might have played 1 or 2 games at Currie Cup level, but generally there was no crossover between URC and Currie Cup. So he had a proper preseason. Even somebody like JC Mars, he didn't release the youngster. He didn't release to play in the Currie Cup because he wanted to give him a proper preseason. And I think that's shrewd management. It's the diametric opposite to the Lions, who go all in the Currie Cup, and then they wonder why they're out on their feet when we come to March. And this year they've lost early games. I mean, I don't really count their win against the Scarlets last week as an achievement. At Ellis Park, you should beat every Welsh team that comes, and you should beat them blindfolded. Quite frankly.
So you must be chomping at the bit this week for the Sharks, then. Yeah?
No, the Sharks will destroy Scarlets this week.
That's what I said. You must be chomping.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, but just looking at, I think the Stormers have been shrewd. I think that they have got a lot of players coming through. They have got, I've been a bit critical of the Stormers' contracting system at times, because sometimes I feel that they could bring in a few more big names. But and Dobbo always talks about building for 2027 or 2029, and sometimes I think that the goalposts start to shift a bit, and I sort of think your fan base wants you to win now. And they are winning right now. I mean, they're winning it as we talk, and I think that they'll probably beat Benetton at the weekend as well. I think that somebody like a Paul de Villiers coming through, Vernon Matonga. We haven't seen Ntutu Machunu, the guy from the Sharks, yet, but they've got a lot of depth in the front row. They can actually have injuries and still ride it. I'm
not sure though. How many see the confusing thing for this weekend? If you're a punter, if you're a bettor, is how all these teams have been announced for the winter tour, and how many players are going to be affected by it. I mean, we don't know if Italy have called up the Benetton players, which make up the majority of the Italian team, and how many of them will be staying to play the game and then joining the camp. It's until Friday we won't know.
Yeah, I think Italy. I might be corrected on this. The Springboks are playing Japan next week outside of the international window. So there's a 2-week break for the Italian players, I think, before they play their first international game, which is the way it should be. I think we're playing next week, and I think England are playing Australia next week. I'm not sure who else is playing next week, but it's looking at Benetton, I can only go on what the Stormers coaches said earlier this week in a press conference, and they said that they believe it's going to be the top Benetton team, and the reason for that is because Italian players don't need to rest for their home games because they rest for their away games. They don't send the international. They lost 46-0 to Edinburgh last week, and I believe that 9 international players were missing, and they were being held back to prepare for this game against the Stormers. Remember too that the Stormers embarrassed Benetton last year in that game in Cape Town. I mean, they thumped Benetton, and that was supposed to be almost like a mini playoff game. It was supposed to be a game that Benetton were going to sort of prove that they were ready to challenge for the URC, and they were thumped. So to them, I think that this is a chance to take revenge for that. So I would be very surprised if we didn't see the top Benetton team play, because it's a home game, and because it's the Stormers, and because they want to prove a point.
Benetton are a decent side at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Zebra went with the second string team the week before last and lost as well. And then when they played against the Stormers, they lost again, but they were a lot better against the Stormers because they had their top players back. It is a thing in Italy that they target the home games. So it is make no mistake, it is a very difficult game for the Stormers. And whilst I suspect they may win, it's not I wouldn't use the word gimme about it. I would have said the Scarlets, and I would have said the Zebra game were games I was pretty certain that the Stormers would win. But this one, not so much. But I still got a feeling that they will. I think they've just got momentum. I think when you've got momentum in your side, it means a huge thing, particularly in a competition like this where you're playing every week. If you're playing in a competition where you play every 2 weeks, or you get interrupted and play some other competition in the meantime, like for instance in December when you have to break to go play Champions Cup. then it's a different story. But at the moment, when you're playing every 7 days, I think momentum's important, and the Stormers have that. They have winning momentum.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, they've given up. How many points have they given up in their 4 games?
When I can't remember the guy.
24.
Giancarlo De Ria, I think is his name. When the Italy fly half kicked a penalty last week in the 67th minute, that was the first 3-pointer in the entire season. Forget about the tries. I mean, they've only conceded 3 tries all season, but they haven't actually had their opponents in position to kick for goal the whole season either. So their territory game has been really good as well. And then he went and he followed up with a penalty a couple of minutes later. So there's now been 2 penalties that have been kicked against the Stormers. But to me, that's a phenomenal statistics that in 4 games, you've conceded 3, you've conceded 2, not 2 penalties, obviously lots of penalties on kick for goal, but you've conceded only 2 kicked penalties. To me, that's as a phenomenal a statistic as just 3 tries given away in 4 games.
Well, so they've got this week. I mean, the Lions are playing Ulster. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that's Ulster on. I think Ulster on the same place that the Stormers are in, which is that they've got winning momentum now. But at the same time, I think that playing the Sharks and the Bulls, and both of those South African teams had their box playing for them, might have been a big mental hurdle for them to overcome. So I would expect. I'd expect the Ulster to win, but I've heard that quite a few of their players have gone back to train with Ireland. So that's immediately one aspect where they weakened, and they've also, as I say, they've had to dig deep. They even against the Sharks last week, after that first 20 minutes, the Sharks came back at them, and they had to defend really well to keep the Sharks at bay. So they expended a lot of energy last week in winning that game, and they also had to ride a storm against the Bulls to win there. So that mental energy thing is an aspect.
Let's tackle the elephant in the room. Let's tackle the Sharks with 13 Springboks in their side last week, and they not very unimpressive.
You know what, Kevin? If you like one of the overriding arguments, or the views that were put through an analysis this last week by the TV pundits and everything, they kept on talking about attacking shape. That the Sharks, where's the Sharks as attacking shape? When do coaches work with attacking shape? They work with it in the off season. When do the Sharks have an off season where their players are present? They don't. They don't have an off season. So it's not to me, it's not rocket science why the Sharks don't perform. Back in the day when Skalkberger and Jean de Villiers and all those guys were playing for the Springboks, and they were playing for the Stormers, they played until November, till the end of the November tour with the Springboks. Then they had a month's break, or actually about 5 or 6 weeks break. Then they would report for duty at the beginning of in about the second week of January. And you'd have 6 weeks then until Super Rugby started. So if a coach wanted to tweak things, he would be able to do it then. If he wanted to change his whole game plan, he can do it then, because he's got 6 weeks to do it. John Plumtree doesn't even have a wash up. He doesn't even have a wash up session after the Sharks lost to the Bulls in the semi-final last year. They had to report to the Springbok camp the very next day. They've been in the Springbok camp ever since then. The first time he sees Eben Etzebeth after the losing at Loftus last year. In fact, I don't think Eben played in that game, but the other box. The first time he's seen them is on Wednesday, and he's playing on Saturday. And you can't. I wrote a piece and saying, if you're the Barbarians and nobody cares if you win or not, then you can bring guys together 3 days before the game.
Well, this is my question, Gav. Why pick so many of them?
I think that was a mistake. I think that's a mistake.
I think it was a massive mistake.
I think that's a mistake, but I think there's also pressure. There's also pressure, Kevin, on the coach to deliver what his bosses want, and there's a marketing strategy there as well. I saw a social media post this week that came out saying, "Come and watch the Springboks. You pay 2,000 rand or whatever it was. You pay 2,000 rand to go and watch the Springboks play. Why don't you come to Kings Park and watch the same guys play for 75 rand?" So there's that marketing strategy that's at play there. They've got to play because they've got to market the team. The people who are running the Sharks, the marketing people, they can't wait for the Sharks Springboks to be back because it sells the game. But unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily translate into, as you say.
Doesn't
So
lead to a
what I'm
cohesive
saying.
unit, does it? No.
Sorry.
I agree with that. I was surprised. I understand why you want to get as many bucks on the bench or in the game as possible from a marketing point of view. But a marketing team doesn't run your team. And I think that when I saw Plum's selections, I was like, I wouldn't have picked 13 of the Buck players.
No, neither would I. Neither would I.
No.
But I think that there is that. Remember, he had a chance to choose in the previous week against Leinster, but he didn't because the guys were fatigued. They came back to South Africa. Apparently, Sia didn't. Sia went to Switzerland or something on some. You see, that's the thing. You've got a lot of very big name players who have other commitments as well. Eben was down in Cape Town. He was in Cape Town that following week doing a book launch. It's this is the thing that you have to deal with when you've got marquee players that have lots of different angles to them.
But the thing is, that's what I love about Dabo. Is you look at how many Springboks he's produced with no-name players, and what happens when these players become marquee? That, like you say, their commitments aren't to the team; the commitments are elsewhere.
You know what?
You can see it in the way they play.
You know what? There also is though in the Cape. A lot of the guys who play for the Stormers were schooled in the Cape, were bred in the Cape. They learnt their rugby in the Cape, and they were Stormers supporters throughout their lives. I don't know if you'll disagree with me, but to me, the most passionate Sharks player at the moment, the one that gives everything on the field, and he's just become an established Springbok, and he's played very well at international level, is Ethan Hooker. He was schooled at Westfall Boys High School, so he's homegrown. He's probably grown up his whole life watching the Sharks. So he's dreamt when he was a kid that he wants to play for the Sharks. And now he's had his opportunity.
Esterhuizen is also a good player for the Sharks, I think.
And Esterhuizen's a good player, but okay, so he wasn't schooled in Durban. He's from outside of Durban, but he played his early rugby. Remember, he played many years for the Sharks before he went to Harlequins. So he's also got that sort of inboard. When you play for a team for a long time, I'm not saying that the other guy. I mean, Sia Khaleesi gives. He bleeds for the Sharks. I mean, I've heard that he's actually been carrying injuries and he's sort of almost on one leg at times. But he wants to do something for the coach. I mean, the Sharks players had a big meeting this week. Apparently, they were addressed by the two team leaders, Eben and Sia, and both of those guys said, "Listen, you guys, we've got to play for the coach and we've got to play for the jersey." And apparently, the whole attitude's been turned around in Durban because maybe there was a bit of complacency last week. Maybe the guys come back. There's also this thing like the Springboks are now serial winners. Back in the day, like the coaches would tell us. I mean, speaking to Sharks coaches and Stormers coaches of yesteryear, they often used to say to me that when the Springboks come back from international duty, it depends how they've done on what you can expect. In other words, if they just won the Tri Nations, then you expect that then the Boks aren't there because the mental energy of winning the Tri Nations and celebrating the Tri Nations, that happened in 2009. The Springboks won the Tri Nations. They had a lot of Sharks players. They came back to Durban. And they played Free State, a very ordinary Free State team in the Currie Cup semi-final, and they got done. And they got done quite badly. It was because the guys just weren't there, because they weren't mentally there. They just won a Tri Nations. On the other hand, if you've done poorly, if the Springboks have done poorly, they come back to provincial level. Jeepers, we need to get a silverware. We need to validate ourselves as rugby players. So we've got to win something. So suddenly those guys are really motivated. And it's a cycle that keeps going. And sometimes you come back from a World Cup like the Springboks did in 2011, where Bryce Lawrence did them in Wellington against Australia. And you're just not mentally there. And that's why the Sharks actually got really badly beaten by a Lions team without any Springboks in the 2011 Currie Cup final. There's so many different things at play. I would not, if I was running a contracting model, I would not, in this day and age where you have a 12-month season and so little opportunity to work with players who are Springboks, I would not connect. I would not do ego contracting. And by ego contracting, I'm talking about, obviously, the guys sort of say, well, look how many Springboks we got. I'm sorry, the number of Springboks you got actually can be counterproductive. And that's not denigrating the Springbok players. If I was Sasha Feinberg in Ngoma Zulu, I wouldn't want to play now in this 3-week period. I would be thinking to myself, I want to actually make sure that I'm fit to go and play in in France in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time. I want to be fit to play against Ireland. Those are big games of the year. And
Mm.
what have I got to gain from playing on a Friday night in Clonechley against Scarlets and on a Saturday night in Palmer? I've got nothing to gain. But unfortunately, Sasha's most of his salary is paid by the Stormers and not by SA Rugby. So he does have to have that loyalty to club as well. But it's the biggest problem, Kevin, really is that we should have a global season
Yeah.
and games more spread out, and then we wouldn't have this constant conflict between club and country, which isn't just a South African problem. But speaking to the
No.
Saracen CEO a couple of months ago, it's a global problem.
Yes. No, without a shadow of a doubt. And I never get the feeling that anyone's closer to solving it, to be honest with you,
No, no. You know what?
Gavin.
You know what? You know why, Kevin? You know why that is. You'll remember Will Carling many years ago saying
Yeah.
that the rugby was being ruined.
Princess Diana's the boyfriend.
Remember Will Carling, the England captain of the time, and Princess Diana.
Yeah.
The Will Carling at the time, he came out with a quote and said that the 57 old farts were ruining rugby.
Yeah.
He was talking about amateur game. He was talking about the amateur era when the Blazers were in charge. And I agreed with him then, and I still agree with him. I wouldn't want the 57 old farts to still be running rugby, but at least the 57 old farts were selected to look after the game. They were custodians of the game. The modern administrators, in my view, are too money oriented, too driven by that bottom line. And it's understandable,
Yeah.
probably, because rugby is in trouble financially at many levels of the sport. But it's like, there's just so much stuff that happens from an economic viewpoint. And I've just mentioned the marketing aspect with the Sharks. It's that is counterproductive to the growth of the game and to the health of the game. And that's one of my problems. I don't know why I'm bringing the 57 old farts into this conversation,
No,
but
well, it was you teed it up. I got the reference. I'm one of those 57 old farts.
yeah, well, those guys those guys. I mean, we couldn't carry on with the amateur rugby, but those guys were all there ostensibly to serve the game. Whereas now
Yeah.
it's like the game is run by people who've got an economic mindset and not necessarily a rugby mindset, not an economic, sorry, not a love of the game aspect, and that's a concern for me.
Well, yeah, the fan base from an international point of view in rugby is much bigger or meaningful than it is in soccer. If you take my meaning, it's like playing for a club is secondary, even though the club pays most of the salary. It seems to be secondary, which is all wrong.
Yeah. Oh, I mean,
How
I
do-
look. Yeah, I mean, are you looking at English football? I mean, you look at.
no,
I
I'm
mean,
just looking at I'm looking at the English football formula. Is it? I'm looking at the formula where you play for your club, you develop your stars through your club, and then they play international games. That's it. Like you say, we need a global season.
but in football, there's never England are never playing on the same day as Liverpool.
No.
Not that it would matter because Liverpool don't have any England players anymore. But oh, actually they do. They have one or two. But since Trent
Yeah.
Alexander-Arnold's gone, they've lost their main one.
Yeah.
But Liverpool and Manchester City and Manchester United never ever play the same day that England do, and they never play, and so they have an international break.
No,
We
no
do.
Premier League side plays on an international day, and I think it extends down to the Championship, which is Division Two. You don't get any of those teams playing when there's an international.
Yeah. Well, the
It
Springboks
allows
are playing
people.
Wales. The Springboks are playing Wales and Cardiff on the 29th of November, on the same day
Oh,
that the Sharks are playing Connacht, on the same day that the Stormers are playing against Munster in Munster, and that's a
yeah,
huge game. So they're gonna. So we already know that the Springboks are going to. I mean, that the Stormers will be without Sasha Feinberg and Gomezulu, without Damian Willemse, without Ben Jason Dixon, without the new prop who's just been chosen, Porthen, and without Kobus Reinach because he's now a Stormer too. So we already know that. Munster, I don't think Ireland will be playing out because that game falls outside of the international window. You won't get Munster playing. You won't get Munster playing. I mean, their Irish players will be available for them probably. Whether they'll choose them if they've been through a tough November international season with Ireland, I don't know. But they will at least be available. And that's one of the big problems is that we don't have any respect for regulation, World Rugby's regulation 9, in the sense
no,
of yeah, the Regulation 9. We put on as many Springbok games as we can possibly get. You've got to look after the other parts of the game if the ecosystem in South African rugby is going to survive.
Do you see any common sense ever be coming in during our time, Gav?
Maybe not during our time. I think that it would be nice. It would be nice, but I'm hopeful. Look, I mean, it depends how long I live.